Shui DJ la Kunsang Kelden la ne Kunsang Kelden la Kurana tanda band expression la je ani legu la ne re in the program ji go zu je ni dong chonga lo ne chi je di nang lo la ne phönang gi phemi so ye mixe gi zomba bota ani sheba shema so gi tamshe gi rawan de la kakdom khande yung gi yeme da kunan so ani yana shungi tsunju chiwa ta kanya chiwe gi di thola ani dus khotope ne legupe nangi chigresha ani kusa gendela kaminaro nash.
Good morning. Is everyone still there? Okay, good. So hi, my name is Kunsang. I'm from the States. I grew up in New Jersey. I'm from New York, and right now I live in London. Can everybody hear me? It's good. Yeah. So right now I live in London, and my father is Tibetan, and my mom is Kalmyk Mongolian, and so I'm mixed heritage. And so a few years ago, can I have the clicker? Thank you. A few years ago, back in 2014, the representative at the time at the Office of Tibet in London asked me to help with a project that he wanted to do, which was to have a conference for Tibetans of mixed heritage in London for the first time ever. So back then we started this project to have a gathering for Tibetans of mixed heritage from all over the world. And the premise of the project is to create a space in which we can invite Tibetans who are of mixed heritage to come together to discuss Tibetan identity, to also learn about Tibetan culture, history, lots of different topics, but mainly to facilitate these discussions, which we don't have a clearly defined space to have, or what I've found in working in the Tibet movement over the years and being at different conferences and things and youth programs, I thought this is something that is very special and very unique and needed in our society. So that's our wonderful logo for our projects. And these are just some examples of mixed Tibetans from around the world. And many of the photos are taken actually by a mixed Tibetan photographer from Toronto, Lodolora. So, you know, just to go back to the beginning of what actually is the definition of being Tibetan. And we thought about this, and this conversation has come up quite a lot, actually. You know, where we have lots of discussions and questions about authenticity and Tibetan culture and traditions. And oftentimes, you know, I think that there's a lot of statements that are made and comments about what are these defining factors that make us Tibetan. And so we looked it up and we found it. And it's actually in the Charter of Tibetans in Exile. And it states that anyone who has a parent, at least one parent of Tibetan descent, means you're Tibetan. So there you go. This is an example of the participants that we've had. We've had 78 participants to date. And this is a map of where everybody is from. They're different, so Tibetan and, you know, Indian, Australian, Mongolian, you know, from all over Europe, different places. However, this is not an entire map of how many mixed Tibetans there are in the whole world, because there are a lot of them, we just haven't met them yet, or they haven't come to our program. But there's lots more. I don't think our photo's loading. All right. Well, anyway, we had our first gathering in London. We had around 25 participants, which was fantastic, and they're from all different countries. And one thing that was really special about that one in particular is that one of our facilitators is actually mixed Tibetan, and she was born in Tibet, and her father was a British officer in Tibet, Reginald Fox. And so she's one of the oldest mixed Tibetans that I know personally. So it was really particularly interesting to see, to hear her speak and to get to know her as a person over the years, just to have more examples of different experiences that folks have. The following year, we were in Zurich, And that was also really special because we also had, as a guest speaker, Kusho Golok Jigmila come and speak to us. And it was really special at the time because he also kindly spoke about mixed Tibetans that he knew in his community back home, and the circumstances in which sometimes people would enter into marriages, especially with Chinese folks. And sometimes, it's not necessarily like a love marriage. And sometimes they would be for economic necessity or arrangement, or, he also mentioned some stories about girls that would be just, they would disappear from his village and then find out later that they had been married off to Chinese families, or, et cetera. So that was actually an interesting jumping off point to think about. We are obviously in exile, but there's also, Tibetans inside of Tibet that we know also have folks who are of mixed heritage. So when we ask these questions about, authenticity, who is Tibetan, these cultural markers, when you think about culture anyway, it's something that is constantly evolving. It's not something that is stagnant, right? Like, it's something that is evolving. As we have been in exile, our culture has also evolved. So I think, when we think about what makes us Tibetan, we think about our language, our dress, our food. And actually, Tibetan dress comes from Mongolia. Our writing system comes from Sanskrit, from India. And I hate to break it to you, but momos come from China. So, our defining markers are things that we have evolved over the years, which have made us Tibetan, but, it's something that has changed. Okay, in 2016, we were in New York, and we had a contingent at the Tibetan Youth Leadership Summit, which was fantastic, and we facilitated a session on mixed heritage, which was really great. That's our contingent, and it was, great at the time. We got a chance to meet with Sikyongla and to make the plans to have our meeting, which took place in Dharamsala 2 years ago. In the meantime, we also have participated in other areas, and what's been great is that the people that we've met, they follow, we kind of present them with things that they can engage with over time. So in thinking about how Tibetans of mixed heritage can contribute to Tibetan society and bring their, what they can offer, what their assets are, what kinds of skills that they have. There's lots of different places to do that. So, we've gone to present a workshop at Machik Weekend. Some kids have gone to the Women's Empowerment Conference. We've done lots of things. So this is our gathering in Dharamsala, which was really wonderful. And obviously having, over the years, each formal gathering that we've had has had support from the CTA, which has been really wonderful in shaping the narrative about people of mixed heritage, but also in continuing to have these conversations and to kind of bring more people in and to present, having more of like an open door policy, and not to say that if you're not this, then you can't hang out with us, right? Like, there's some people in this particular conference, for example, that there was one gentleman who is Tibetan and Indian, but he was adopted by British parents, and he had no idea like who his Tibetan family was, and he had never met Tibetan people before. And coming to this gathering was the first time he had ever been to India, first of all, and then second of all, coming to Dharamsala, and then coming to meet our people, right? And it was a very important experience for him at the time. And at that time, I think he was around 40, so it was something that was very new and something that, he knew he wanted to do. But it kind of took to that point and that age to kind of find a comfortable entry point, let's say. Okay, so in terms of visibility, I think we've tried to present who we are in many different ways and to show that we're a diverse group. And try to point people in the direction and areas that they are interested in. I mean, we've had folks who've done Tibet Core, we've had folks who've become involved with SFT. You know, some people are interested in museum work, so they've worked with the Tibet Museum or projects, you know, connected to that. And it's been really good to just kind of, you know, not enforce any rules really, but just to say, if you're interested in language study, here's this. If you're interested in Buddhism, you know, here's this resource. And I found that that way of encouraging people and trying to empower people in and really articulating and understanding their Tibetan identity has been a really successful way of also getting them involved and taking up leadership roles. Because for us as the organizers, we're all volunteers. You know, nobody gets paid for this. We're all, you know, from different places. And over the years, we've also had participants present presentations on like what they specialize in. So there's been different ways that we have sort of evolved ourselves as a project, which has been nice. So I think in terms of inclusivity, that's kind of our strong suit. And I know that over the years, I've heard a lot of stories about folks who felt quite isolated or dislocated from, you know, a community, or they're not really familiar with things, and they've also felt a lot of feelings of shame or being shamed, you know, in different instances, and it's really not helpful. And, you know, on a personal level, like I personally don't speak Tibetan language, which, you know, has made the past 2 days being at this program a little bit difficult to kind of catch up and to see, you know, all the conversations that are happening. And I think that there's some sense of a lack of belonging that some people feel, that we try to, you know, get folks that maybe they didn't grow up inside of a community, they didn't jump on board to become an activist or something like that. But, you know, we try to say that if you're not, you know, involved, you can get involved at different points. And in terms of, you know, language learning, I know that that's a really important part of being Tibetan. But at the same time, even for me myself, you know, my parents were they both speak to each other in English, for example, right? And I understand that it's really important to emphasize language learning. However, you know, in my household growing up, I'm the oldest, and then I had two younger sisters below me, right? But my middle sister, you know, she had a lot of learning disabilities and a lot of health issues and things, and she was also hearing impaired. So my father, mostly not really being around and working and stuff, you know, my mother, being Kalmyk American, was sort of left to decide and make decisions about my educational, you know, upbringing. And so in our household, if you already have a child which is not able to learn at the same level as the other two, you know, as a parent, you have to make decisions. And I think that's something that I take into consideration a lot now that I'm older. And, you know, about a month ago, I was at IATS in Paris, the International Tibetan Studies Conference, and again, Tsering Shakila was, in his address, was talking about how Tibetan parents nowadays have to make a decision about which language to educate their children in and which language to sort of emphasize with their children. And I think it's something that, you know, is an issue that we should address, but also it's not something that we should think of as a problem, but also, you know, something that makes us more dynamic as a community. So, did that. Okay. Also, I think, you know, mixed heritage is a conversation that is happening globally. It's not just something that is singular to the Tibetan exile community. Or, you know, Tibetans in Tibet. And I think that it's something that we have an opportunity to sort of make plans for how to be supportive of parents, how to be supportive of people who are living on the outsides of this world. And I think, we always have to kind of be inviting and welcoming as much as possible, and that's what I would ask everyone to do in terms of sharing space. So, thank you.
Kunsang, ani ngabju ngaguni chiche tenda nidong jugubo duda pernanglo yogo mangbuchi gamita nyambo pazu chansi gya an puyula yoba mangbuchi pembuchi dukse ta kanta chigela yoba so mangbuchi chige nyamdo chansi gya ani dindi chiche mixed heritage di maur mangmashi nyung kyune dugyo yomare dindi sonza tenda acha Kunsang Kelden la ki tenda mixed heritage digang ya pemise tugen shesere sonza ngara dingchi di gyeje ta tiwa mixed ku mo cheche di pemise we nenga resha pemise gechimbu resha nganzo jizo di nanglo la 벽의 식민도 뷰이 디 제식민도 제제 파마비와 제제 강두두 nganzo gi zenju jizo di nanglo la 주주의 기 탑시 저들라 닝탁반 두치세 무튼이 nang로 치 심슈 마차로 치스 쮸엔 두체
그치나 지와 타마
nye tuwa di Kunsang Kelden la ni nye tuwa di inge tuwa chuna yaadu samgi Kunsang Kelden la. I wanted to ask you, so as a member of the Tibetan Diaspora and as a leader of the Tibetan mixed heritage community, you raised a statement about what Tsering Sheke had made at the International Tibetan Studies Conference in Paris. So this crucial point of time where parents have to make a decision about how they want to upbring their children, in what language. I want to ask you what your personal take on that is and what your opinion on it is.
So I'm not a parent. I haven't had to make that decision yet. But in thinking about education, and I've spoke to educators before and people who are teachers, and all I know is that what I do know that doesn't work is shaming children into feeling badly about not being able to speak the language. That definitely doesn't work. In fact, it has the actual opposite effects because it makes them resistant to and having a bad association with learning that language. I know this because that was me, basically, as a kid. And then also, I was just having this conversation last night with a friend of mine who is a teacher, Olo, in Boston, and he was talking about how, it's important to think about that, especially at a young age, when children are speaking with their parents. He was using Spanish as an example of, when they try to use the parent tries to use the limited amount of English that they have to practice with their child. However, they have such a limited vocabulary as opposed to their native language, which they have a much, much larger vocabulary. So, and I have a friend in London who, he's Tibetan from Amdo. His wife is Chinese. They have a daughter. He speaks to his daughter in Tibetan. The mother speaks to the daughter in Chinese. This seems to be working. I don't know. It's not an exact science. But I think, and then, that child will then go to school in the UK and learn English as well. So, I know I've also had discussions with people that say, growing up in a bilingual household for children, sometimes it takes them a little bit longer to speak and to process language because they're processing two languages at the same time. I'm not a linguist. I'm not an educator in that sense. My personal feeling is that I think it's good to have both languages of both parents. I think that's important. In my case, because my parents, their common language was English, that's what I ended up with. And I didn't grow up in a community. I didn't have Tibetan friends growing up. There was nobody around at that time in New Jersey in the 80s. So it wasn't until much later, so what I mentioned earlier about educational experiences or decisions that my mother had to make for us, as a child, you have no control over it until you're old enough to go to take like a language course somewhere, probably by college age, at which point it's much harder to learn a language and then also take time off or make it a part of your course of study to do like full immersion to get the maximum amount of experience with that type of that language. So, I mean, that's all I can say on that, I guess.